The silence felt like a physical weight crushing the room. I watched my 8-year-old daughter Emma freeze, her science project still clutched in her small hands, her eyes widening with shock and hurt. My mother had just said the unthinkable, loud enough for everyone to hear after Emma accidentally knocked over a glass of water near my sister Bella's son. We wish Bella's kids were our only grandkids. The words hung in the air like poison. Emma's lower lip trembled before she dropped her project and ran from the dining room, sobbing. My sister Bella looked away uncomfortably while her perfect children sat smugly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Something deep inside me shifted, hardened, and I knew this moment would change everything. I grew up in a modest 2-story house in suburban Pennsylvania, where the changing seasons marked the rhythm of our lives. My childhood photos show a seemingly normal family, but even in those frozen moments, you can see the pattern that would define us. My sister Bella, 2 years older, always positioned front and center, often holding a trophy or certificate, while I stood slightly to the side, my smile a bit more hesitant. Bella was the golden child from the start. She excelled at everything she touched, from academics to sports to piano recitals that had my mother dabbing tears from her eyes with pride. She followed the path my parents had envisioned perfectly, attending their alma mater, marrying a successful accountant named Michael, and promptly producing 2 children who were genetic copies of her perfection, Jackson and Lily. I took a different route. I was drawn to art and literature, more interested in creating than competing. When I announced my plan to attend art school rather than the business program my father had selected, the disappointment was palpable. "Artists don't pay the bills, Bonnie," my father said, shaking his head. Still, I persisted. At art school, I met Jack, a photography major with kind eyes and big dreams. We married young, much to my parents' dismay, and when I became pregnant with Emma at 23, their reaction was hardly the joy you'd expect from future grandparents. "Are you sure you're ready for this responsibility?" my mother had asked, her lips pursed in that way that made me feel like I was still 12 years old. Jack and I divorced when Emma was 3. The pressure of young parenthood and financial struggles cracked the foundation we'd built on passion rather than stability. He moved to Seattle for a job opportunity, and while he remained in Emma's life through video calls and summer visits, I became the primary parent navigating the challenges of raising our creative, spirited daughter. The favoritism toward Bella's family wasn't sudden, but rather a steady drip of small moments that formed a pattern impossible to ignore. Christmas presents told the story clearly, Bella's children receiving expensive electronics and designer clothes, while Emma unwrapped educational toys from discount stores. During family gatherings, my parents would lavish attention on Jackson and Lily, praising their every achievement, while Emma's attempts to join conversations were met with distracted nods or redirected back to her cousin's accomplishments. Emma was, and is, an extraordinary child, though not in the conventional ways my parents valued. At 8, she built elaborate worlds from cardboard boxes and wrote stories that made her teachers call me in for conferences about her exceptional creativity. She struggled with sitting still, diagnosed with ADHD that my parents referred to as behavioral problems when they thought I couldn't hear. She had a fierce sense of justice that sometimes put her at odds with authority figures who couldn't answer her persistent why questions. I had tried addressing the favoritism before. Last Thanksgiving, after my father spent an hour helping Jackson with a math worksheet while repeatedly brushing off Emma's request to show him her drawings, I approached my mother in the kitchen. "Do you notice how Dad spends so much more time with Jackson than Emma?" I asked carefully, keeping my voice light. "Bonnie, don't start." Jackson needed help with his homework. Emma just wanted attention for scribbles. They weren't scribbles, Mom. They were detailed illustrations for a story she wrote. Her teacher said they're exceptional for her age. My mother had sighed that martyred sigh she had perfected. "You've always been too sensitive. Not everything is a competition between the girls." But it was. It always had been. After the only Grandkids incident and Emma's tearful escape from the dining room, I followed her upstairs to the guest bedroom where she had hidden herself in the closet, her science project in pieces around her. "They hate me," she sobbed, her small body shaking. "Grandma and Grandpa wish I wasn't born." I gathered her into my arms, my heart breaking and hardening simultaneously. "That's not true, honey. Grandma said something very, very wrong and hurtful. But it's not about you, it's about them. That night, after getting Emma to sleep, I checked my phone to find a missed call from my father. I thought perhaps it was an apology, but instead found a text message he had accidentally sent to me rather than Bella. So sorry about the scene today. Your mother feels terrible about what happened. We've transferred an extra $2,000 for the kids' private school tuition. We have to make it work, even though we have to spend on Emma too. Call when you can. I stared at the message for what felt like hours, the final piece of evidence I needed. This wasn't about me being overly sensitive. This wasn't my imagination. The grandparents who should have cherished my daughter saw her as a burden, a financial obligation that took away from their real grandchildren. That night, something changed in me. The hurt transformed into resolve. Emma deserved better, and I was going to make sure she got it. The weeks following the incident were some of the most difficult of my life. Emma, usually resilient and quick to bounce back from disappointments, seemed to fold into herself. She refused to visit my parents, bursting into tears whenever I mentioned their names. Her teacher called to tell me she'd stopped participating in class discussions and had been found crying in the bathroom twice that week. The nightmares started 3 days after the incident. I would wake to her screams, rush to her bedroom, and find her tangled in sweat-soaked sheets, crying about being abandoned, about not being good enough, about everyone leaving her. Even Daddy left because I'm not good like Lily and Jackson, she sobbed one night, referring to her cousins. That's not true, sweetheart, I assured her, stroking her hair until her breathing steadied. Daddy loves you so much. He calls you every day, doesn't he? And I will never, ever leave you. But the damage was done. Children absorb rejection like sponges, especially when it comes from those who should love them unconditionally. After a particularly bad week where Emma refused to eat, and her teacher reported she was falling behind in schoolwork, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Sarah Coleman, a child psychologist recommended by Emma's pediatrician. Dr. Coleman spent an hour with Emma, then met with me privately. Your daughter is experiencing what we call rejection sensitivity, she explained, her kind eyes serious behind her glasses. The incident with her grandparents has triggered a fear of abandonment that's affecting her sense of security and self-worth. How do I fix it? I asked, desperate for a solution. This isn't something that can be fixed overnight, Bonnie. Emma needs to know she's valued and loved consistently. But she also needs to understand that her grandparents' behavior isn't her fault. I'd recommend family therapy, including the grandparents if possible. I nodded, though I already suspected how my parents would respond to such a suggestion. I was right. I arranged a family meeting at my parents' house the following Sunday. Bella was there too, her perfect family in tow. I had asked her to leave the children at home, but she insisted they come along, claiming they had a birthday party afterward. I've asked for this meeting because what happened 2 weeks ago deeply hurt Emma, I began, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. Dr. Coleman, her psychologist, suggests family therapy to help us work through this. My mother's face instantly hardened. A psychologist? Bonnie, don't you think that's extreme? It was one comment, taken out of context. What possible context would make saying you wish your granddaughter didn't exist okay? I asked, feeling heat rise to my face. That's not what I said, my mother snapped. And maybe if Emma wasn't so sensitive, like someone else I know, this wouldn't be an issue. My father cleared his throat. What your mother means is that Emma has always been a bit more challenging. Bella's kids just don't cause these kinds of scenes. I stared at him, incredulous. She knocked over a glass of water by accident, Dad. She's 8 years old. Bella shifted uncomfortably, then spoke. Look, Bonnie, I know you're doing your best as a single mom, but Jackson and Lily know how to behave at the dinner table. Maybe Emma needs more structure, more discipline. That was when I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about my parents. Bella was complicit in this dynamic, perhaps even encouraging it. The golden child was still golden, and now her children were continuing the pattern while my daughter suffered. Emma is a creative, brilliant child who's struggling right now because the people who should love her unconditionally have made it clear they don't, I said, standing up. This meeting is clearly pointless. I left without another word. ignoring my mother's calls to come back and discuss this rationally. That night, after tucking Emma into bed with extra stories and reassurances, I spent hours researching family psychology, grandparent relationships, and the long-term effects of familial rejection on children. The statistics were grim, linking childhood rejection to depression, anxiety, and relationship problems later in life. I would not let that happen to my daughter. As I scrolled through articles, an email notification appeared on my screen. My father had forwarded me and Bella information about college account statements. Curious, I opened the attachment and felt a cold wave of shock wash over me. The statement showed two 529 college savings accounts, one for Jackson and one for Lily, each with balances over $30,000. There was no account for Emma. I scrolled through the history of contributions, monthly deposits since the day each of my sister's children were born. 5 years for Jackson, 3 for Lily, not a single dollar for my daughter. The final piece clicked into place. This wasn't just emotional favoritism, it was financial too. My parents were actively investing in Bella's children's futures while ignoring Emma's. I closed my laptop, my mind suddenly clear. This wasn't about making my parents love Emma equally. That might never happen. This was about protecting my daughter from people who had already proven they would hurt her, and about creating a life where she was surrounded by people who truly valued her. The next morning, I called Taylor Jensen, my college roommate who had gone on to become a family attorney. It was time to take action. Taylor agreed to meet me for lunch the next day at a quiet cafe downtown. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 2 years, but she hugged me like no time had passed. With her sleek bob and sharp pantsuit, she looked every bit the successful attorney she had become. "It's so good to see you," she said, sliding into the booth across from me, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything, from the years of subtle favoritism to the devastating comment and its aftermath, finally showing her the email about the college accounts. "What are my options legally?" I asked after finishing my story. "Can I prevent them from seeing Emma, if they're going to treat her this way?" Taylor took a thoughtful sip of her coffee. "Legally, grandparents have very few inherent rights to visitation in Pennsylvania, unless they've acted as primary caregivers or there's been a death or divorce situation where they had an established relationship that's being cut off. So I can just stop taking Emma to see them?" "Yes, you could. But Bonnie, court isn't always the best first approach for family issues." Taylor leaned forward. "What's your goal here? To punish your parents? Or to protect Emma and potentially heal the relationship?" Her question caught me off guard. What did I want? Revenge felt tempting in my darkest moments, but what I truly wanted was for Emma to feel loved and valued. I want Emma to be surrounded by people who appreciate her for who she is. If my parents can learn to do that, great. If not, I need to protect her from their toxicity, I answered honestly. Taylor nodded. Then let's think about this strategically. I suggest a 3-part approach. Protect Emma emotionally. Create clear boundaries with your parents, and document the inequity in case things escalate. Over the next hour, Taylor helped me craft a plan. First, I would seek ongoing therapy for Emma and myself, with a specialist in family trauma. Second, I would clearly communicate to my parents that their access to Emma would be contingent on their acknowledging the harm they'd caused and agreeing to family counseling. Third, I would continue documenting all instances of favoritism or inappropriate behavior. What if they refuse counseling? I asked. Then, you maintain your boundary, Taylor said simply. Emma's well-being is the priority here. That afternoon, I called Dr. Coleman's office and asked for a recommendation for a family therapist who specialized in intergenerational trauma. They referred me to Dr. Melissa Andrews, who had 20 years of experience with complex family dynamics. I scheduled appointments for both Emma and myself, then reached out to Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, to explain the situation. She was wonderfully understanding, offering to give Emma special projects that played to her creative strengths and to keep an extra eye on her emotional state during school hours. Emma is one of my brightest students, Mrs. Patterson assured me. Her mind works differently, and that's her strength, not a weakness. We'll help her through this rough patch. With professional support in place, I began the process of documenting every instance of favoritism I could recall. I created a spreadsheet with dates, events, and specific behaviors, adding the text message from my father about the extra tuition money and the college account information. Looking at it all laid out chronologically made my stomach clench. The pattern was undeniable and had been going on for years. While organizing my documentation, I discovered something that made my blood boil. Scrolling through my parents' Facebook page to find dates of past family gatherings, I came across photos of a trip to Disney World 3 months ago, featuring my parents, Bella, Michael, and their kids. I had never heard a word about this trip. Clicking through the album, I saw my father lifting Jackson onto his shoulders in front of Cinderella's castle, my mother buying Mickey ears for Lily, all of them beaming in matching family t-shirts. They had taken a family vacation without ever mentioning it to us. I dug deeper and found an old email exchange between my parents and Bella discussing the dates. "These weeks work best since Bonnie and Emma couldn't attend anyway," my mother had written. No one had ever asked about our availability. We had been deliberately excluded. As I stared at the photos of the vacation we hadn't even been invited to join, my phone rang. It was Bella. "Mom and Dad said you stormed out of the family meeting," she said without preamble. "They're really upset, Bonnie." "They're upset? What about how upset Emma has been for weeks because of what Mom said?" "Look, I know Mom shouldn't have said that, but she was frustrated. Emma had been acting up all evening." I gripped the phone tighter. She was excited about her science project and wanted someone to notice her, Bella. "Your kids had been getting all the attention all night." "That's not fair," Bella protested. "It's not the kids' fault that they're easier to be around." Easier because they fit into the perfect grandchild mold? Because they don't ask challenging questions or have ADHD or need a little extra patience? Silence stretched between us. Then Bella sighed. "I don't want to fight with you. Can't we just move past this?" "Mom and Dad are talking about coming to Emma's school for Grandparents' Day next week. That should show her they care." My heart stopped. "Grandparents' Day? No one asked me about that." "Well, Emma's teacher sent out an email to all the parents. Mom and Dad assumed you'd be fine with it." I felt a cold fury building. Not only had they not apologized for deeply hurting Emma, but they were now planning to ambush her at school without my permission. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "They are not to show up at Emma's school. She's in therapy because of them, Bella. She has nightmares because of what Mom said." "Don't you think you're overreacting?" It was one comment. It wasn't just one comment. It was years of treating her as less than your kids, and I won't allow it anymore. I ended the call, my hands shaking. Within minutes, my phone lit up with a text from my father. "Your mother and I will be attending Grandparents' Day. We have a right to see our granddaughter. Stop being difficult." That text confirmed everything. They had no remorse, no understanding of the harm they'd caused, and no respect for my role as Emma's parent. The time for hoping they would change on their own had passed. I called Dr. Andrews and moved our first appointment up to the next day. Then I emailed Emma's principal and teacher, explicitly stating that my parents were not permitted to visit Emma at school without my presence and prior approval. The battle lines were being drawn, but I wasn't backing down. Emma's well-being depended on it. The next morning, I sat in Dr. Andrews' warmly lit office, nervously twisting my hands in my lap. She was a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair and glasses that made her look both intellectual and approachable. "So, Bonnie," she said after I'd explained the situation, "what are your goals for our work together?" "I need to protect my daughter from people who are hurting her, even if they're family. But I don't want her to lose her grandparents entirely if there's any way to make the relationship healthy." Dr. Andrews nodded thoughtfully. "That's a balanced approach. In cases like this, I often recommend a period of limited or supervised contact while we work on establishing new patterns and boundaries." "Have you communicated your concerns clearly to your parents?" "I've tried, but they dismiss me as being oversensitive or overprotective." "Then perhaps it's time for a more formal boundary setting. Would you be comfortable writing a letter clearly stating your concerns and conditions for continued contact with Emma?" The idea of putting everything in writing, of making my stand official, was both terrifying and liberating. With Dr. Andrews' guidance, I drafted a letter that evening after Emma went to bed. It was firm but not accusatory, focused on Emma's well-being rather than blame. I outlined the harmful patterns I'd observed, the impact on Emma, and my conditions. acknowledgement of the hurt caused, commitment to family counseling, and equal treatment of all grandchildren. I sent the letter by certified mail the next day, then braced myself for the fallout. It came swiftly. My phone rang less than 2 hours after the mail would have been delivered. "What is the meaning of this?" my mother demanded without greeting. "Some ridiculous formal letter like we're strangers?" "Did you read it, Mom? Really read it?" "Of course I read it. This nonsense about us not loving Emma, about favoritism and counseling requirements. How dare you? How dare I protect my daughter from being told to her face that you wish she wasn't your grandchild?" "That is not what I said. You're twisting my words and poisoning Emma against us. We have every right to see our granddaughter." "Actually, you don't," I said, surprised by how calm I felt. "Not unless I allow it. And I won't allow it until you acknowledge what you did and agree to counseling." "Is this because of the money?" she snapped. "Are you jealous that your sister's children have college funds? Maybe if you had made better life choices, you could provide those things for Emma yourself." The cruelty of her words stole my breath for a moment. "This isn't about money, Mom. It's about Emma knowing she's loved and valued for exactly who she is." "We're not discussing this further," my father's voice suddenly cut in, indicating he'd been listening on another extension. "You will bring Emma to Sunday dinner as usual, or there will be consequences." "What consequences, Dad? More favoritism? More cruelty toward an 8-year-old girl?" "I don't think so. The letter outlines my conditions. Ball's in your court." I hung up, my heart racing but my resolve firmer than ever. The next few weeks were a blur of activity as I implemented other parts of my plan. While maintaining the boundary with my parents, who continued to call and text with alternating pleas and threats, I focused on building a stronger support system for Emma. I reached out to friends I'd somewhat neglected since becoming a single mom, organizing playdates for Emma with their children. My friend Alicia, a kindergarten teacher with a daughter Emma's age, became a particular source of support, offering to watch Emma whenever I needed a break and planning special outings for the girls. I also did something I'd been hesitant to do before. I called Jack's parents, Diane and Robert, who lived about an hour away. After Jack and I divorced, contact with them had dwindled, partly due to distance and partly due to my own embarrassment at the failed marriage. But they had always been kind to Emma during our marriage, and Jack had mentioned they often asked about her during their calls. "Bonnie?" Diane sounded surprised when I called. "Is everything all right?" I explained the situation as neutrally as possible, not wanting to seem like I was trying to turn them against my own parents. "We'd love to be more involved in Emma's life," Diane said without hesitation. "We've missed her terribly. Jack shows us the pictures you send him, but it's not the same as seeing her." The following weekend, we drove to their small lakeside home. I watched with a lump in my throat as Robert swung Emma into the air, exclaiming over how tall she'd grown, and Diane presented her with a hand-knit sweater in Emma's favorite purple. They spent the day fishing off their dock, making cookies, and listening attentively as Emma showed them her science project, the one my parents had ignored. "She's remarkable," Robert told me quietly, as we watched Diane and Emma feeding ducks by the water. "So bright and creative. You're doing a wonderful job raising her, Bonnie." His simple words of affirmation brought tears to my eyes. This was how grandparents should be. We began visiting them regularly, and Emma blossomed under their attention. She still worked with Dr. Coleman on her feelings about my parents, but having loving grandparents in her life helped fill the void. My parents, meanwhile, escalated their efforts. 3 weeks after I sent the letter, I received a call from Emma's school. My mother had shown up claiming she needed to deliver an important medication for Emma. I checked Emma's records, the school secretary told me, and there was no medication listed. When I questioned her further, she admitted she just wanted to see her granddaughter. I reminded her of your instructions and asked her to leave. I thanked the secretary profusely for enforcing the boundary, then called Dr. Andrews in a panic. "This is actually a common escalation," she assured me. "Your parents are testing the boundary to see if it holds. The fact that the school upheld your wishes sends an important message. But be prepared for more tests." The next test came when my parents showed up unannounced at our house on a Saturday morning. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "We want to see Emma," my mother said, attempting to peer around me into the house. "I was very clear in my letter," I replied steadily. "No visits until you acknowledge the harm done and agree to counseling." This is ridiculous, my father huffed. We're her grandparents. Yes, you are. And grandparents who love their grandchild don't tell her they wish she didn't exist. We never said that, my mother protested. You said you wished Bella's kids were your only grandkids. What exactly did you think that meant to an 8-year-old? They had no answer. After more attempts to get past me, they finally left, my mother in tears and my father warning ominously that this isn't over. He was right. The following Thursday evening, my phone rang with a call from Bella. You need to stop this, she said without preamble. Mom and Dad are devastated. Are they seeking counseling? Have they acknowledged what they said to Emma? They shouldn't have to jump through hoops to see their own granddaughter. Do you know what you're doing to this family? I'm protecting my daughter, I said simply. What are you doing, Bella? Standing by while your children are favored and mine is rejected? That's not fair. It's not my fault or my kids' fault that Emma is more challenging. No, but it is your fault that you've enabled and benefited from the favoritism for years. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Bella's voice changed, becoming lower and more serious. Look, Bonnie, you need to fix this. Mom and Dad have talked to a lawyer about grandparents' rights. They're planning to take legal action to force visitation. My blood ran cold. They're what? They've consulted with Attorney Wilson about filing for court-ordered visitation. They're serious, Bonnie. Just give in before this gets ugly. I hung up, my mind racing. Could they actually get a court to force Emma to visit them? I immediately called Taylor, who promised to research Pennsylvania grandparent visitation laws more thoroughly and get back to me. That night, I held Emma extra tight as I tucked her in, watching her peaceful sleeping face and promising silently that I would protect her, no matter what. My phone rang just as I was getting ready for bed myself. It was Taylor. I've looked into it, she said without preamble. In Pennsylvania, grandparents can petition for partial custody or visitation in certain situations, including when there's been a separation or divorce of the parents. Since you and Jack are divorced, they could technically file. So they could win? I asked, my stomach dropping. Not necessarily. The court always considers what's in the best interest of the child. If you can demonstrate that visits with your parents are harmful to Emma's emotional well-being, especially with documentation from her therapist, you have a strong case. Plus, the burden is on them to prove that visitation would not interfere with the parent-child relationship, which clearly it would in this case. I breathed a little easier. So what do I do now? Document everything. Every call, every text, every attempt to circumvent your boundaries. And have Dr. Coleman document Emma's emotional state and progress. If they do file, we'll be ready. As I hung up, a new text came through from my father. You've left us no choice but to pursue legal options. This could all be avoided if you would just be reasonable. I didn't respond. The battle lines were now officially drawn, and I needed to prepare for war. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived from Wilson and Associates, my parents' attorneys. Inside was a formal letter outlining their intent to file for grandparent visitation rights, claiming that I was unreasonably preventing them from maintaining their relationship with Emma. I forwarded the letter to Taylor immediately, who called me within the hour. Don't panic, she said. This is mostly posturing at this stage. They're hoping you'll cave under the threat of legal action. I won't, I said firmly. Not unless they meet the conditions I set out. Good. Now, let's prepare our response. I'll draft a letter addressing the legal aspects, but I think we should also include documentation of the pattern of favoritism and the harm it's caused Emma. Over the next week, Taylor and I gathered our evidence. The text message about the extra tuition money, screenshots of the college fund statements, Dr. Coleman's professional assessment of Emma's emotional state following the only grandkids incident, and a detailed timeline of events leading up to my decision to restrict contact. Taylor's letter was masterful, firmly establishing that my decision was based solely on Emma's well-being and outlining the specific behaviors that would need to change before visitation could resume. She attached our documentation and sent it to Wilson and Associates with copies to my parents directly. Now we wait, she told me. Either they'll back down when they see we're serious and have solid documentation, or they'll proceed with filing. Either way, we're prepared. The day after our response was delivered, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. Bonnie? This is Michael, Bella's husband. I was surprised. Michael and I had always been cordial, but never particularly close. He tended to follow Bella's lead in family matters. Is everything okay? I asked cautiously. Not really. Look, can we meet somewhere? I'd rather not talk about this over the phone, and Bella doesn't know I'm calling you. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our homes the following afternoon. Michael arrived looking uncomfortable, glancing around as if worried someone might see him. Thanks for meeting me, he said as we sat down with our coffees. I need to talk to you about this situation with your parents. I'm not backing down, Michael, if that's what Bella sent you to convince me. He shook his head. Bella didn't send me. She doesn't know I'm here. Look, I love my wife, but this situation has gotten out of hand. What your mother said to Emma was cruel, and I told Bella as much at the time. I studied his face, surprised by this unexpected support. The thing is, he continued, lowering his voice, I've been uncomfortable with the favoritism for years. The different Christmas gifts, the way your dad will spend hours teaching Jackson to fish, but can barely maintain a 5-minute conversation with Emma. It's not right. Then why haven't you ever said anything? I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. Family dynamics are complicated. I didn't want to create problems between Bella and her parents. But when I heard they were planning legal action, he shook his head. That crosses a line. Thank you for saying that, I said softly. It means a lot to know someone else has seen it too. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. There's something else you should know. Your parents have been paying our mortgage for the past 3 years. He slid the paper across to me. It was a bank statement showing regular transfers from my parents' account to an account labeled Willow Street Property. That's our house, he explained. When we bought it, your father insisted on helping us out. We make a small payment to them each month, but they cover about 70% of the actual mortgage. I stared at the paper, a fresh wave of hurt washing over me. They've never offered to help me with housing, not even when Jack and I were struggling right after Emma was born. I know, and there's more. They've been paying for private school for the kids, all the extracurricular activities, and they fund our family vacations. The Disney trip you probably saw on Facebook? They paid for everything. Each revelation felt like another brick added to the wall of inequality that had been built between our families. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Michael met my gaze directly. Because what they're doing is wrong, both the favoritism and now this legal threat. And because I found out they're planning to use their financial support of us as evidence of how much they value their grandparent role, while painting you as vindictive for cutting them off from Emma. My mouth fell open. That's completely twisted. I agree. And I can't stand by anymore. He tapped the bank statement. You can use this if you need to. And I'm willing to testify about what I've witnessed if it comes to that. I folded the paper carefully and put it in my purse, my mind racing with this new information. Thank you, Michael. Truly. But what about Bella? This could cause serious problems between you. He nodded grimly. I know. But sometimes doing the right thing comes with a cost. Armed with Michael's revelations, I called Taylor to update her on this new evidence. She was both surprised and pleased. This strengthens our position considerably, she said. It demonstrates a clear pattern of financial favoritism that supports your concerns about emotional favoritism. What should we do with this information? Taylor was quiet for a moment, thinking. I have an idea, but it's somewhat unconventional. Instead of just responding to their legal threat, what if we get ahead of this by bringing everything into the open? What do you mean? A family meeting. But not just you and your parents and Bella. I'm talking about extended family, Jack's parents, maybe even close family friends who've witnessed the dynamic. Make it impossible for your parents to maintain the fiction that they've treated the grandchildren equally. The idea was both terrifying and appealing. No more secrets, no more pretending. Everything out in the open. It would be intense, I said hesitantly. Absolutely. But it might be the shock they need to actually see their behavior clearly. And having witnesses makes it harder for them to dismiss your concerns as you being oversensitive. After discussing the details with Taylor, I began reaching out to family members. My Aunt Susan, my father's sister who had always been kind to Emma, my Uncle Dave and his wife Lisa, who had commented on the favoritism at last year's 4th of July picnic, Jack's parents, who had witnessed it firsthand during our marriage, and finally, Bella and Michael. To my surprise, most agreed readily to attend, expressing concern about the escalating conflict. Bella initially refused but eventually agreed when Michael insisted. I chose a neutral location, a private room at a local community center, for the following Saturday afternoon. Taylor would be there for support, and I had arranged for Emma to have a special day out with Alicia and her daughter. As I prepared for the meeting, gathering my evidence and practicing what I would say, I felt a strange calm descend. This confrontation had been years in the making, and regardless of the outcome, I knew I was doing the right thing for Emma. The day of the meeting arrived bright and clear. I arrived early with Taylor to set up the room, arranging chairs in a circle and setting up a small table with water and coffee. My hands shook slightly as I laid out copies of the key evidence I planned to present. People began arriving, greeting each other somewhat awkwardly given the circumstances. Jack's parents gave me supportive hugs. Aunt Susan squeezed my hand and whispered, "It's time someone stood up to them." Bella and Michael arrived next, Bella pointedly avoiding my gaze while Michael gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. Finally, my parents walked in, looking defensive and angry. "What is the meaning of this ambush?" my father demanded, looking around at the gathered family members. "This isn't an ambush, Dad," I said calmly. "It's a family meeting to address issues that affect us all. Please, sit down." Once everyone was seated, I took a deep breath and began. "Thank you all for coming. I've asked you here because there's a situation that has been hurting Emma deeply, and despite my attempts to address it privately with my parents, it has now escalated to legal threats." I explained the incident with my mother's only grandkids comment, Emma's subsequent emotional distress, and my decision to restrict contact until my parents acknowledged the harm and agreed to counseling. "That's ridiculous," my mother interrupted. "One comment taken out of context does not justify keeping our granddaughter from us." "It wasn't one comment, Mom," I said evenly. "It was the culmination of years of treating Emma as less than her cousins." I then presented my evidence methodically, showing the different gift values, the college fund statements, and finally, with an apologetic glance at Michael, the mortgage payment information. "The pattern is clear," I concluded. Jackson and Lily receive not only more attention and affection, but also significant financial advantages that Emma does not. When I tried to address this privately, I was dismissed and eventually threatened with legal action. The room was silent as I finished. My father's face had grown progressively redder, while my mother stared stonily at the floor. "Richard, Nancy," Aunt Susan said finally, turning to my parents. "Is this true? Have you really been treating the grandchildren this differently?" "We help all our grandchildren," my father said stiffly. "But not equally," Michael spoke up unexpectedly. "Let's be honest here. Jackson and Lily get everything. Emma gets scraps of attention when it's convenient." Bella turned to him, betrayal in her eyes. "Michael!" "It's true, Bella, and you know it," he said quietly. "We've benefited from it for years, but that doesn't make it right." My mother suddenly stood up. "This is outrageous. We've done nothing but try to help our family, and this is the thanks we get? A public humiliation?" "No one is trying to humiliate you," I said. "I'm trying to protect Emma from being hurt by people who should love her unconditionally." "We do love her," my mother insisted. "Then why did you tell her you wished she wasn't your granddaughter?" "I never said that. You said you wished Bella's kids were your only grandkids. What's the difference?" As they continued to deny and deflect, I felt a calm determination settle over me. It was time for my final piece of evidence. "I didn't want to do this," I said, reaching for my phone. "But since you continue to deny what was said, I have no choice." I played an audio recording. My mother's voice filled the room, clear and unmistakable. "God, Richard, I sometimes wish Bella's children were our only grandchildren. Emma is so difficult, just like Bonnie was. Always questioning, never just doing what she's told. And that ADHD business, it's just an excuse for poor parenting." The recording continued, capturing a conversation between my parents that I had accidentally recorded when I called my father's phone during a visit last year, and it answered without him realizing. I had discovered it weeks later when searching through my call history for another reason. As the recording played, my mother's face drained of color. My father stared at the floor. When it ended, the room was deathly silent. "That's taken out of context," my mother finally whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. "There is no context where that would be acceptable," Diane, Jack's mother, said firmly. "That child is a treasure. And if you can't see that, it's your loss." "I have more recordings," I said quietly, "including one where you discussed how unfortunate it was that I had a child at all, since I wasn't mother material like Bella." My parents looked trapped, cornered by their own words. The extended family members exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I don't want to use these recordings," I continued. "I don't want to take legal action. All I want is for Emma to be treated with the love and respect she deserves. If you can't do that, then you shouldn't be in her life until you can." My father stood abruptly. "This meeting is over. Nancy, we're leaving." As they gathered their things, I made one final plea. "Please, think about what's really important here. Not your pride, not who's right or wrong, but your relationship with your granddaughter. She loves you despite everything, and she deserves better." They left without another word, my mother in tears and my father's face like stone. I sat down, suddenly exhausted. "You did the right thing," Taylor assured me, squeezing my hand. The rest of the family expressed their support as well, even Bella, who approached me hesitantly after most others had left. "I didn't know it was that bad," she said quietly. "The things Mom said on that recording. It's been that bad for years, Bella." She nodded slowly. "I see that now. I'm sorry I didn't before." As everyone departed, I felt both drained and somehow lighter. The truth was finally out, for better or worse. What happened next was up to my parents. I didn't hear from my parents for 3 days after the family meeting. The silence was both a relief and a source of anxiety as I wondered what their next move would be. Emma continued her therapy sessions, and I focused on maintaining our new normal, grateful for the support network we had strengthened. On the 4th day, I received a formal letter from my parents' attorney withdrawing the threat of legal action for grandparent visitation. It stated simply that my parents had decided not to pursue the matter at this time, which left the door open for future attempts but gave us breathing room. "It's a positive sign," Taylor said when I called her about the letter. "The recordings probably made them realize they'd have a hard time convincing a judge they were acting in Emma's best interest. I hope she was right, that my parents were rethinking their approach rather than simply regrouping for another attack." As the days passed without further contact, I began to believe we might have reached a stalemate, if not a resolution. Then the phone calls began. Not from my parents directly, but from family, friends, church members, and business associates of my father. "Nancy is absolutely devastated," reported Mrs. Henderson, my mother's bridge partner of 20 years. "She cries constantly about missing Emma. I don't know what's happened between you two, but surely you can find it in your heart to forgive her?" "Richard says you've cut them off completely from seeing Emma," said Mr. Barton, my father's golf buddy. "That seems extreme, doesn't it? They're not getting any younger, you know." Each call followed the same pattern. Concern about my parents, subtle or not so subtle pressure for me to relent, and no acknowledgement of what had actually happened or the harm done to Emma. It became clear that my parents were sharing a carefully edited version of events that cast them as victims of my unreasonable demands. "This is a common tactic," Dr. Andrews explained during one of our sessions. "It's called triangulation, bringing in third parties to apply pressure rather than addressing the issues directly. The best response is to be brief but clear about your boundaries while not getting drawn into defending yourself." I took her advice, developing a simple response. "This is a private family matter that I'm handling in the way that best protects my daughter's well-being. I appreciate your concern, but this isn't something I'm discussing with others." Most callers backed off after this, though some persisted, revealing just how distorted a version of events they had heard. "Your mother told me you're punishing them because they can't afford to give Emma as many gifts as her cousins get," said my mother's cousin Janet. "That hardly seems fair when they're on a fixed income." I nearly laughed at this absurd reversal of the truth, but managed to maintain my composed response. The triangulation attempts continued for over a week, becoming more desperate as they failed to produce the desired result. Then, 3 days after the last phone call, I received a text from Aunt Susan. "Something you should know. Your parents were confronted at church today by the Wilsons and Thompsons. Apparently Michael has been talking. Things got heated." I immediately called Michael, who confirmed that he had indeed spoken to several mutual friends of our families after witnessing my parents continuing to spread misinformation. "I couldn't stand it anymore," he explained. "They were telling everyone you were keeping Emma away out of spite, that you were jealous of Bella's success." I set the record straight with a few key people, including Pastor Wilson. Pastor Wilson and his wife had known our family for decades, and the Thompsons were prominent members of both the church and local business community. If they had confronted my parents publicly, it represented a significant blow to my parents' social standing and carefully cultivated image. "What happened?" I asked. From what I heard, Pastor Wilson approached them before the service and asked to speak privately. They refused, saying they were running late. Mrs. Thompson overheard and joined the conversation, asking directly about what your mother had said to Emma. It escalated from there, with your mother denying everything and your father getting angry. Several other people witnessed it. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication that others were finally seeing the truth, but also sadness at the public unraveling of my parents' facade. The church incident was apparently just the beginning. Over the next week, I heard from various sources that my father's business partners were questioning his character after learning how he had treated his granddaughter. 2 couples canceled their standing dinner plans with my parents. My mother was asked to step down from the church fundraising committee she had chaired for years. I took no pleasure in their social difficulties, but I recognized that for people like my parents, who had built their lives around appearances and standing in the community, this was perhaps the only consequence that would truly register. 10 days after the church confrontation, Bella called me. "Mom and Dad are falling apart," she said without preamble. "Dad's business is suffering because people are canceling meetings with him. Mom barely leaves the house anymore. Is this what you wanted?" "No, Bella. It's not what I wanted," I replied honestly. "What I wanted was for them to acknowledge how they hurt Emma and commit to treating her with the same love and respect they show your children. That's still all I want. Then call off the dogs. Tell people to leave them alone. I haven't told anyone to confront them or avoid them. People are reacting to learning the truth about their behavior. That's not something I can control." Bella was quiet for a moment. "Michael and I have been arguing about this constantly," she finally admitted, her voice smaller. "He thinks they need to apologize and change. I think everyone's overreacting to one bad comment." "It wasn't one comment, Bella. You heard the recording. You've seen the financial discrepancies. You've witnessed the different treatment for years." Another pause. Maybe I didn't want to see it because it benefited my kids. It was the closest Bella had ever come to acknowledging her role in the dynamic, and I felt a tiny spark of hope that perhaps something good could eventually come from this painful situation. "I miss you," she said unexpectedly. "I miss when we could all just be together without this tension." "I miss that too," I admitted. "But that family togetherness came at Emma's expense, and I can't allow that anymore." "I understand," she said softly, and for the first time, I believe she might actually be starting to. 2 weeks after the church incident, my father called. His voice sounded older, more subdued than I'd ever heard it. "We need to talk," he said. "Not over the phone. In person." I agreed to meet him, alone, at a neutral location, a quiet cafe where we'd be unlikely to run into anyone we knew. When I arrived, I was shocked by his appearance. He had lost weight, and his normally immaculate attire was slightly rumpled. He looked like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down across from him. I waited silently, determined not to make this easy for him. "The past few weeks have been." He paused, searching for words. "Difficult. Your mother is not well. She's barely eating, hardly sleeping." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I didn't want my parents to suffer. Things at church, in the community, people are looking at us differently. Business contacts are canceling. Friends aren't returning calls. I simply nodded, still waiting. He took a deep breath. I want to know what it will take to end this. End what, exactly? This situation, the estrangement, the community reaction. I studied him carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. Has anything changed, Dad? Do you understand why I had to take the stand I did for Emma's sake? He looked down at his coffee. I understand that things got out of hand, that perhaps your mother said some things she shouldn't have. That's not enough, I said quietly but firmly. This isn't about saving face or restoring your social standing. It's about Emma's well-being and her relationship with grandparents, who truly value her for who she is. What do you want from us, Bonnie? There was a hint of his old impatience. The same things I outlined in my original letter: acknowledgement of the harm caused to Emma, commitment to family counseling, equal treatment of all grandchildren, emotionally and financially. That's it. That's all it's ever been about. He was silent for a long time. Then, to my surprise, his eyes filled with tears. I had seen my father cry exactly once before, at his own father's funeral. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice rough. I don't know how to be different than I've always been. It was the most vulnerable I had ever seen him, and it cracked something open in my heart. That's what the counseling is for, I said gently. No one is expecting instant perfection, just a genuine commitment to change. He nodded slowly. I'll talk to your mother. This has been harder for her. As our meeting ended, he asked hesitantly, How is Emma? She's doing better, I said truthfully. She has good support around her. That's good, he said. That's good. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it felt like the first small crack in the wall between us, a tiny opening where light might eventually enter. 2 months passed with no direct contact from my parents, though Bella kept me updated on their state of mind. According to her, they had begun seeing a therapist, which surprised me given their previous dismissal of that psychology nonsense. My father's business was slowly recovering as he worked to repair damaged relationships, and my mother had started venturing out socially again, though she was notably more subdued. During this time, Emma continued to flourish with the support of her therapy and our strengthened circle of caring adults. Jack's parents had become regular fixtures in our lives, visiting at least twice a month and FaceTiming Emma weekly. Her nightmares had stopped, and her teacher reported that she was once again participating enthusiastically in class. We had established new traditions and rhythms that didn't revolve around my parents' approval. Sunday dinners, once a tense obligation at my parents' house, became relaxed gatherings with friends at our home. Emma's creativity blossomed as she realized that her ideas and projects would be met with genuine interest rather than cursory acknowledgement. One particularly significant moment came when Emma won a district-wide science competition with an elaborate project on ecosystem interdependence. As she received her medal on stage, she was cheered on by Jack's parents, Alicia and her family, and even Bella, Michael, and their children, who had made a special effort to attend. The pride on Emma's face as she looked out at her supporters brought tears to my eyes. So many people love you, Emma, I told her that night as I tucked her in, her medal hanging proudly beside her bed. I know, she said with a contented smile. And they love me just for being me. Her simple statement confirmed that she was healing, understanding that she was valuable and lovable exactly as she was, not for meeting someone else's expectations. The following week, I received a letter from my parents. Not a legal document this time, but a handwritten note in my mother's distinctive cursive. With trembling hands, I opened it. Dear Bonnie, we are writing to request a meeting with you, and eventually with Emma if you feel it appropriate. We have been working with Dr. Marshall for the past 7 weeks, examining our behavior and its impact on you and especially on Emma. It has been a difficult and painful process to confront the ways in which we have caused harm. Dr. Marshall has helped us understand that our treatment of Emma reflected our own unresolved issues rather than any failing on her part or yours. We would like the opportunity to apologize in person and to begin the process of making amends, if you are willing. Dr. Marshall has offered to facilitate this meeting at her office. We understand if you need time to consider this request. We will respect whatever decision you make. With love, Mom and Dad. I showed the letter to Dr. Andrews at our next session. What do you think? I asked her. The language suggests they've done some genuine work, she observed. The acknowledgement of causing harm and the recognition that the problem was with them, not Emma, are significant steps. Meeting with a facilitator present would provide a structured, safe environment. After careful consideration, I agreed to meet with my parents at Dr. Marshall's office the following week. I decided not to include Emma in this initial meeting, wanting to assess their progress myself before exposing her to potential disappointment. Dr. Marshall's office was warm and welcoming, with comfortable seating arranged to facilitate conversation without confrontation. My parents arrived before me, looking nervous but composed. "Thank you for coming, Bonnie," Dr. Marshall said. "Your parents have been working very hard to understand the dynamics that led to this situation and to develop healthier patterns for the future." I nodded, still cautious, and took my seat. Dr. Marshall guided the conversation skillfully, allowing my parents to express their remorse while ensuring I had space to respond honestly. "I deeply regret what I said about wishing Bella's children were our only grandchildren," my mother said, her voice quavering. "There is no excuse for such a cruel statement, especially in front of Emma. Dr. Marshall has helped me understand that my words reflected my own unresolved issues with perfectionism and control, not any failing in Emma. And I regret not stepping in to stop the favoritism," my father added. "As the children's grandfather, I should have ensured they were all treated with equal love and respect. Instead, I perpetuated a harmful pattern." Their words seemed genuine, but I had heard promises before. "What's different now?" I asked directly. "How can I trust that this isn't just about repairing your social standing?" My father looked me in the eye for perhaps the first time since this all began. The honest answer is that the social consequences did force us to confront our behavior in a way we might not have otherwise. I'm not proud of that. But what we've learned goes far deeper than concern about what others think. My mother nodded. Dr. Marshall has helped me understand that my treatment of Emma stems from my own childhood experiences. My father was highly critical, especially of creativity and nonconformity. I internalized those values and unconsciously imposed them on you and Emma. We've been exploring healthier ways to relate to all our grandchildren, my father continued. We understand now that love shouldn't be conditional on meeting certain expectations. Dr. Marshall gently guided us through a detailed discussion of specific behaviors that needed to change, and my parents listened attentively as I explained how their actions had affected Emma. "We've also addressed the financial inequity," my father said, presenting a folder with documents. "We've established a college fund for Emma, equal to what we've saved for Jackson and Lily. And we've calculated the value of the extra financial support we've given Bella's family over the years, and set aside an equivalent amount for you and Emma." While the financial gesture was meaningful, what moved me more was the genuine remorse I saw in their faces, and their willingness to take concrete steps toward change. "I appreciate everything you've said today," I told them. "But rebuilding trust will take time, especially for Emma. She's been deeply hurt." "We understand," my mother said softly. "We're prepared to do whatever it takes, for as long as it takes." Over the following weeks, we continued meeting with Dr. Marshall, gradually establishing a framework for rebuilding our relationship. My parents committed to ongoing therapy, both with Dr. Marshall and in family sessions with Dr. Andrews. They agreed to my conditions regarding equal treatment and respect for Emma's unique qualities. After 2 months of these structured meetings, I finally agreed to a carefully planned reunion between Emma and her grandparents. We arranged for it to happen at Dr. Andrews' office, with both Dr. Andrews and myself present to support Emma. Emma was understandably nervous, clinging to my hand as we entered the office where my parents waited. "Remember," I whispered to her, "you don't have to do or say anything you're not comfortable with. Dr. Andrews and I are right here." My parents had clearly prepared for this moment. They remained seated, giving Emma space rather than rushing to embrace her. They had brought a single, thoughtful gift, a telescope Emma had mentioned wanting months earlier, rather than the excessive presents they might have used in the past to try to buy her affection. "Hello, Emma," my mother said gently. "We've missed you very much." Emma pressed against my side, studying them cautiously. "Why did you say you wished I wasn't your granddaughter?" she asked directly, with the unfiltered honesty of children. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but she maintained her composure. What I said was terribly wrong, Emma. It wasn't true then, and it isn't true now. The problem was in me, not in you. I'm so sorry for hurting you. We both are, my father added. We're learning how to be better grandparents who appreciate you exactly as you are, with all your wonderful creativity and curiosity. Emma considered this, then asked, Are you still going to like Jackson and Lily better than me? No, my father said firmly. We love all our grandchildren equally, with their different qualities and interests. We didn't show that properly before, but we're learning how to do better. The meeting was brief, but meaningful. Emma didn't rush to forgive or forget, maintaining a careful distance that I respected, but she did agree to another meeting the following week. Slowly, over many months, we rebuilt our family relationships with new awareness and boundaries. My parents demonstrated their commitment to change not through grand gestures, but through consistent, thoughtful actions. They attended Emma's science fair and listened attentively as she explained her project. They invited both families to dinner and ensured each child received equal attention and affirmation. They began family therapy sessions with Bella's family as well, addressing the enabling role she and Michael had played in the dynamic. 1 year after the fateful "only grandkids" comment, we gathered for Emma's 9th birthday celebration. It was the first full family gathering since the confrontation, held at a neutral location, a local park with plenty of space for the children to play. I watched carefully as Emma proudly showed my parents the certificate for a special science award she had recently received. Instead of the cursory acknowledgement of the past, they responded with genuine interest and pride. Tell us more about how you designed your experiment, my father asked, sitting down beside her on a park bench. What gave you the idea to approach the problem that way? My mother added, clearly engaged in the conversation. Emma's face lit up as she explained her process, growing more animated as she realized they were truly listening. Later, I noticed my parents giving equal time and attention to Jackson and Lily, appreciating their interests without creating comparisons or competition. As the party wound down, my mother approached me, where I stood watching the children play. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For having the courage to hold us accountable. For giving us the chance to change. She looked over at Emma, laughing as she showed her cousins how to use her new microscope. We almost lost something precious because of our own blindness. My father joined us, nodding in agreement. It's not easy to face your own failings, especially when you've spent a lifetime believing you were right. But the alternative was losing our relationship with you and Emma. That was unthinkable. That evening, after all the guests had gone and Emma was getting ready for bed, she called me into her room. Mom, can I tell you something? Of course, sweetheart. I think Grandma and Grandpa really are different now. They really listened about my science award. And Grandma asked if I would teach her how to draw like I do. I think they are different too, I agreed, smoothing her hair. You know what the best part is? Emma said, her eyes serious. You showed me that I deserve to be loved for exactly who I am, and that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even to family. I hugged her tight, overwhelmed by the wisdom of my 9-year-old daughter. That's right, Emma. You always deserve to be loved for exactly who you are. As I turned out her light and closed her door, I reflected on the painful journey of the past year. The hurt had been real, the conflict necessary, but the growth that resulted had transformed our family in ways I never could have anticipated. By refusing to accept the status quo, by insisting that Emma deserved better, I had not only protected my daughter, but ultimately helped heal generational patterns of conditional love and favoritism. Standing up for what's right, especially when it means confronting family, is never easy. But sometimes, it's the only way forward. Sometimes, love means having the courage to demand better from those who should know better. And sometimes, the most powerful lesson we can teach our children is that they deserve to be cherished, exactly as they are. No compromises, no conditions, no exceptions. Have you ever had to take a stand against family members to protect someone you love? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in navigating difficult family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage and strength in your own.